This is Labor Day weekend, and on this Shabbat we celebrate labor, both the fact of labor, the importance of work, but also the importance of labors and of organizing, of those who work toward advocacy for workers and make sure that we live in an ever more just and fair society. It's been our real honor here at Beth Am over the past decade to partner with Jews United for Justice, and Rachel Cutler is here, who's the leader of JUFJ here in Baltimore. And over the past 10 years, JUFJ has worked on a number of different issues. Last year, you may recall, we had a wonderful panel discussion that Evan Serbic helped organize on juvenile justice. Luckily, we solved that problem last year. Unfortunately, we did not solve that problem last year. We're still working on that, and there'll be work to do to end auto charging of minors, for example, and that work continues. But on this Shabbat, we focused on another area, a couple of other areas of JUFJ's work, and by extension, a number of our Beth Am members' work as well. And I want to mention something from the Parsha this week, the Torah portion. I talked about how in chapter 15 there's a focus on poverty and a concern about, as we're entering the land, what sort of a community are we going to establish there, and what are we going to do with those who are on the margins? And there's an insistence that poverty not exist in the land, and then paradoxically a reminder that poverty is going to exist in the land because unfortunately we live in an unredeemed world. And so the question is, how do you mitigate the experience of those who don't have enough? And there's an insistence that the community do more. The reminder here is about the sabbatical year, which is coming, and you may recall that in the sabbatical, the Shemitah year, that debts are forgiven, and those kind of remuneration of debts, or remission of debts, is a good thing, but of course it brings along with it a challenge, which is that if debts are going to be forgiven in the 7th year, people are much less likely to loan money in the 6th year because they're worried that they're not going to get those funds back. The rabbis later on come up with a solution to this where they create a kind of legal fiction that allows for the rabbinic court to receive money and to distribute that, so that, because there isn't sort of a simple solution, but here we're told that God is really displeased if we are to withhold. So it says the following: if, however, there's a needy person among you, one of the kinsmen in any of your settlements in the land and the Lord your God is giving you, do not harden your heart and shut your hand against your needy kinsman. Rather, you must open your hand and lend him sufficient for what he needs. Beware, lest you harbor the base thought, the 7th year, the year of remission, is approaching, so that you are mean to your needy kinsman and give him nothing. He will cry out to God against you, and you will incur guilt. So there's an understanding, we Jews have been good at guilt trips for a long time, really from the beginning. There's an understanding that, to believe in God and to care about a God of justice is also to hold ourselves accountable to a more godly way of being in the world. One of the things that we've taught at Beth Am over the years, and that I've attempted to frame for us, is this concept of a new Jewish neighborhood. That we think about this historic Jewish community, which once was filled with a majority of Jewish people and Jewish institutions, but as for many decades been a minority Jewish neighborhood. How can those of us who remain in the community through our work, through our worship here at Beth Am, or maybe who live in this community, think differently about who is our neighbor, right? When the Torah speaks about our kinsmen, when the Torah speaks about looking out for one another, how do we extend that? Not that that is not also within the Torah. There is a concern for those beyond the Jewish community, even within the simple reading, the plain reading of the text. But here you might think that we're saying, look, we're going to be concerned only about Jewish folks. And what I want to suggest to you is that as we think about applying these values beyond our parochial needs, that means also thinking about not simply what is the civilization that ought to have been set up in Israel 3,200 years ago when our ancestors crossed over the Jordan River into Canaan, but actually what is the society that we are commanded to set up and support here in Baltimore, here in Maryland? Who are our neighbors? Who are our kinsfolk? Who matters? And of course, the answer to that is that everybody ought to matter if we're going to be this kind of a community that we believe in and that Jews United for Justice fights for. So we have two guests today who are going to be speaking. We welcome Courtney Jenkins, who's the president of the Metropolitan Baltimore AFL-CIO, and also Ray Baker, whose title is incorrect on your program because he just got a new job, and that new job is as Maryland Director for Baltimore, D.C. Building Trades Council. And Presidents Jenkins and Baker are going to speak about two different issue areas that are near and dear to them and are also bubbling out of their work in the labor organizing communities. One is Fair Share Maryland, a series of demands that are being made for a more equitable distribution of taxing in the state. And the second one is two issues that are kind of grouped under the umbrella of what we call Baltimore City Not For Sale. I will just say one kind of personal feeling of my own, and Evan and I have had conversations about this. I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I really am not. And I'm really deeply concerned about the influence of David Smith and Sinclair Media and Armstrong Williams on Baltimore right now. And whether it's the purchase of the Sun paper and then the attempt to kind of use that paper in the same way that Sinclair has used other media outlets to tell a particular story, or a particular story about Baltimore, right? The constant drumbeat of a city in crisis. I live in this city. I love this city. It has its challenges, to be sure. But if you watch Fox 45, you might think that we live in a war zone. And that's degrading. And it's really destructive to a city that at Beth Am we love and that we're invested in and have been for 50 years in this building that's been a synagogue for over 100 years. So I'm going to stop talking now and call on Courtney and Ray to come forward and tell us a little bit about why these issues matter to them and why they and I feel they ought to matter to all of us. Welcome.
So good morning, Beth Am.
Good morning.
My name is Courtney Jenkins. I'm president of the Metropolitan Baltimore AFL-CIO Central Labor Council. I bring greetings from the leadership and delegation of our great council, where we represent over 100 local labor unions composed of nearly 80,000 union members in the greater Baltimore metropolitan area. It's an extreme honor to be here with you this morning, and I want to thank Rabbi Berg and the leadership of Beth Am for welcoming the House of Labor into your beautiful house of worship. Congregations like Beth Am are welcoming union members into their houses of worship to help grow our coalition of working families and reaffirm this fact: faith and labor are inextricably linked together. Union members are the leaders of our houses of worship. Union activists are members of our congregations and faith communities, because we know that what affects one affects the other. Are there any union members here today, or any children of union members? Or there we go. The history of labor movement and organizing for justice is strongly linked to our houses of faith, and have always been and will always be a place where working class families come together so their faith isn't without work. We know Labor Day is a hard-earned holiday coming out of the struggle of working people for the 8-hour day and the right to have a voice at work by organizing unions. For working families, our houses of worship have provided a safe haven where working people can openly discuss and organize around political, economic, and social issues that impact their communities. And what's the saying? Faith without work is dead. We cannot profess our faith without matching it with the deeds and efforts that legitimize it. Every day, workers have faith in their ability to help shift the dynamics of power between the haves and the have-nots. We educate, we organize, and we mobilize so that workers across the globe can realize true economic, social, and political justice. After all, that's what organizing really takes: some faith, some courage, and going on a journey that at first seems insurmountable. I'll read a passage here from Deuteronomy 24:14 through 15, that says, "You shall not abuse the needy and destitute laborer, whether a fellow countryman or a stranger in one of the communities of your land. You must pay him his wages." Let me say that again. "You must pay him his wages on the same day before the sun sets, for he is needy and sets his life on it. Else he will cry to God against you, and you will incur guilt." As we know, that's a very powerful verse, and one that is the bedrock of faith and labor. It shows us that organized labor and faith communities fight to uphold the same principles of respecting our neighbors and uplifting the most vulnerable. It's about doing what is right and doing what is just, looking out for one another, building community by building empathy, and knowing that when one person is suffering, in some ways we all suffer. That language makes it clear that we must ensure the well-being of the most marginalized among us. All workers deserve dignity, respect, and a living wage, not abuse and neglect. It goes to our saying in labor that an honest day's work shall be met with an honest day's pay. And after all, we know many working families are working multiple jobs just to make ends meet. Having to decide whether to keep the lights on or to be able to afford life-saving medications or send their children to schools with the tools they need to succeed are choices no person should have to make. So when our Labor Council organizes programs like our food pantry or our holiday basket giveaway, we make sure working families that need support can lean on our union coalition to help get through a tough time. After all, how can we all prosper when our neighbors are suffering? Our union contracts don't prioritize the few over the many. It protects us all. So when our unions like Unite Here Local 7 negotiate collective bargaining agreements with big hotel corporations, they're fighting so that the whole can succeed. That's what equity and fairness truly looks like. But when our nurses at Ascension St. Agnes are organizing and bargaining for a first contract, they're fighting for economic justice, not just for themselves, but the patients they care for. And justice and fairness is one of the reasons why our council and its affiliated organizations are part of the Maryland Fair Share Coalition. Our goal is to create a just economy where we hold wealthy corporations accountable to paying their fair share. It's a very simple concept. And right now, the system is rigged and unfair, with the wealthy corporations manipulating the rules and putting the burden of funding things like education, healthcare, and public safety on the backs of working families and small businesses. Right now, the wealthiest 1% of Marylanders pay a smaller share of their income in taxes than most of us, if not all of us in here today. And because of this, Maryland is losing out on millions of dollars a year by failing to close those loopholes. So under that fair share plan, Maryland could raise $1.6 billion with a B dollars in revenue each year to support good schools, healthcare, transportation, and the state workforce needed to deliver high-quality services. That fair share plan would cut taxes for more than 1 million Marylanders with a family income of $80,000 a year or less. It would boost working families' incomes while reducing child poverty and strengthening our economy. It would ensure that the wealthiest 1% of households in our state pay their fair share in taxes, which means those earning around $775,000 a year or more. And we would see an average increase of less than 1% of their income going towards taxes. The plan would also support local, Maryland-based businesses by ensuring a level playing field so that their large corporate competitors are also paying their fair share in state and local taxes. And last but not least, the plan would advance economic and racial justice by addressing aspects of Maryland's tax system that disproportionately benefit the wealthy, while other households are having the expense of the burden shifted upon them. We can accomplish this by closing corporate tax and LLC loopholes, reforming state income taxes by adding a 7% tax on millionaire and billionaire income, and expanding working family tax credits so that relief extends to low and moderate income families. And these are just a few of the solutions our coalition is supporting that would take us down a path that is equitable and just for all of us. You can find more information about the Fair Share Plan by visiting fairsharemaryland.org, which is a shameless plug. But it is our shared faith and change and the work that accompanies it that makes our work have meaning. Labor Day and the season presents us with an opportunity for people of faith to reaffirm a commitment to justice for working people during a time where we see companies and corporations lead with greed. It is an injustice that huge corporations that bring in millions of dollars or billions of dollars in profits refuse to hear and do what is just and right by negotiating fair agreements with workers who help them bring in those record profits. The growing disparity in wealth we see today is the CEO refusing to hear the cry of working families that work day in and day out to survive. After all we want is to be heard. to receive our worth as workers, to be able to retire with respect and dignity after a career that helps feed our families. Before I close, I would like to share a personal experience with everyone in this room. In March of 2020, I was a mail processing clerk working at the United States Postal Service. It was one of the most trying times of my life and the life of my coworkers. We were deemed essential employees who couldn't work from home as the world shut down. And I remember in those first few months the uncertainty of work and life, not knowing if we would contract COVID. Or clocking in one night, not seeing one of our coworkers, and wondering if we would ever see them again. At that time, I was a shop steward on the work floor, responsible for enforcing our union contract. And during COVID, that role was reinforced but also transformed. We became so much more to our sisters and brothers at work. We were on the front of the front lines, acting as therapists, caregivers, and sometimes advisors. I can recall sitting down with my members and crying with them. And even though we were masked up, I remember the pain I saw in the eyes of many. The tears that would flow when a parent would ask me to help them figure out how to balance virtual learning with working. I remember my coworkers who tested positive for COVID returning to work saying they wouldn't wish it on their worst enemy. I remember throwing caution to the wind because social distancing didn't work in the world of representing your coworkers. I would pray before, during, and after every shift. I would pray for mercy, healing, and protection. I would pray for working people I had never met because if one suffers, we all suffer. And I realized that without faith, I wouldn't have made it through that very tough time. But I can tell you that it wasn't only the mask or the sanitizer that protected me. It was God. It was faith. It was a work that accompanied that faith. When he spoke to me, it was through a new agreement negotiated by our union to help provide security to families that had to adjust to a new way of life. When he spoke to me, it was turning on the news to see a legislative act that heard the cries of working people by providing paid leave when families fell ill. When he spoke to me, it was through our great labor council, distributing donated PPE to workers who were struggling to protect themselves. In hindsight, I realized that the things we fought for during the pandemic weren't things that we should have had to fight for at all. But it took a global pandemic for many to see that the large, wealthy corporations could and should do what was necessary to end the race to the bottom. Things like ensuring workers have a living wage, paid leave to take care of themselves and family members when we fell ill, a voice at work to make sure democracy could be felt on the shop floor. So if you're looking for ways to support working people on the ground, first and foremost, pray for them. Organize a workers' right training at your synagogue. Advocate for policies that work for working people. And support organizing efforts in our area. So when you go grab that cup of Starbucks, let the barista know that you're standing with them as they organize. Everyone can't do everything, but everyone can do one thing. Thank you for having me with you today at service. Rabbi Berg, I look forward to working with you as we continue to do his work. Thank you, sir.
Peace to all the believers. It is a blessing to be amongst them. Thank you, Rabbi Berg, and all of the folks here at Beth Am who have made this possible. Community and justice. Community and justice. I come to this work under those two guides. There's a book by the writer Robin Kelly called Hammer and Hoe. That is how I arrive here. Through my family, with the hammer and the hoe. My great-grandfather, on my mother's side, worked in the agricultural fields in Bertie County, North Carolina. The polite word we use for that is sharecropping. It's when you work someone else's land. He worked the land until he died, literally, dying, seated on a bucket, falling over upon his hoe. I come to this work because of the hammer. My father was an elevator construction man. He helped build the Baltimore subway system before the bad stuff happened. So ride along it now, it's not his fault. He got that job, a union job, International Union of Elevator Constructors, local number 7, part of the Baltimore, D.C. Building Trades Council. He got that job because in order to build the Baltimore metro system, to get state and federal money for it, there needed to be economic and racial justice. Racial justice where the workers must look like the residents of that city. Economic justice where it must be union work. The union, with too few black men, had an office in the basement of Mondawmin Mall, and his grandmother sent him down there to get one of those good union jobs. I come here by way of the hammer and the hoe. Public policy bent in the direction of justice, serving the community. The work speaks to my personal values, community. For 13 years of my life, I was an only child, much like this adorable young man who stands at the door, coming in and out. The world is but his oyster, much like the young man we saw here enjoying pretzels while the rest of us were listening to the beautiful melodies of our worship. And then all at once, through tragedy in our family, and through the blending of a family where my dad married a woman who had 3 kids, I looked down and I had 4 brothers sharing? What? Community and justice. One of the elders I learned from says, life is all about community. It took 2 to make you and 6 to carry you out. It begins and ends with community. The Luo people of Eastern Africa, what we would now call Kenya, over in the Lake Victoria region, will tell us that alone a youth runs fast. With an elder, slowly, but further. It is the origin of what most of us probably are more familiar with. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. Community will never ask for more than what you have to give it. However, it will always provide whatever it is that you may need. Now, justice. Despite any of our differences, justice remains a universal truth. Whether you believe in the Egyptian concepts of the 42 principles of Ma'at, or you simply look to the 19th chapter of Leviticus, specifically the 13th verse for us labor folks, Brother President, where it instructs us not to defraud our neighbor or hold back the wages of a worker. It's Labor Day weekend. You guys knew you were going to get wage talk. Baltimore City is not for sale. Renew Baltimore was a collection of those who were interested in lowering the property tax rate. And as a homeowner in Baltimore City, who amongst us would not like to see the property tax rate lowered? But at what cost? When I dial 911 to save a loved one, do I want a busy signal? When 52% of the residents here in our city are renters, yet they have to drive along the same streets that all of us use. And those potholes tear up all the $200, $300, or $400 I've saved because I need to get my car fixed. Thankfully, the Maryland State Supreme Court has saw fit that that is not constitutional and shall not be on our ballot. So we do not have to worry about that. But lest someone tries to present it a different way, please know they are not interested in your welfare. They are not trying to be your kinsmen. They are not efforting to be in community with you. In fact, they're defrauding their neighbor. Shrinking the Baltimore City Council sounds like it's something that would be good if you want to lower government overhead. However, what does that mean for democracy? Those of us engaged in the political space now often hear rhetoric at the top of our ballot. One side would say, in order to preserve democracy, we need to ensure there is integrity in our elections. The other side says, in order to preserve democracy, we must vote for our candidate because the other side is not inherently democratic. Whichever space and however you interpret democracy, we do not need to look so far, fellow Baltimoreans. We can save democracy here at home. To shrink the Baltimore City Council would specifically weaken democracy right here in Baltimore City. It would reduce the council size by 50%, nearly doubling the size that each council person represents. Currently, as is, council persons represent approximately 40 to 42,000 residents for each council person. Should this ballot measure pass, they would represent upwards of 70,000 people. That weakens residents' access to those who represent them. Additionally, it decreases the electoral power of Black Baltimore, which makes up more than 60% of our city. Further, it weakens the electoral power of all low-income residents. The rapper Lupe Fiasco, if I may, Rabbi, he says, greed is colorblind, so they colorblind. They're gonna come for yours soon as they're done with mine. No matter who we are, we will have limited access to those who have the power to wield government and bend policy in the direction of justice. It would increase power to the wealthiest few of us, not the great many that our brother president alluded to just now. Sounds again like defrauding our neighbor. So what is our conclusion? What is to be done? Far too many people have made broad careers of telling us the problem with too few solutions. We may love Lassie. You're a little too young for that. Don't worry about it. It's an old TV show with the dogs. We may have loved Lassie, but Lassie never went down into the well to save Timmy. Lassie merely made enough noise. So who are we? Who am I? Who is Brother President Jenkins? Are we merely Lassies? Or are we the ones to go into the well to save Timmy? We are here to not just bring you problems, but to offer solutions. The solution, the way forward, is simple. Two simple concepts that this congregation already believes in and practices: community and justice. Through community, we can achieve justice. There will be literature that you all can access that will demonstrate the various organizations that are working together in solidarity for the same peace. Those that we've already called by name, the Jews United for Justice, working with the Ujima's People Party, working with the Metro Baltimore AFL-CIO. There are far more, but I wanted those three. Those seemingly are the most disparate. And when those three can come together for shared community, we, humble believers, must also do the same. History is our great predictor. Malcolm X teaches us that of all of our studies, history is best qualified to reward our research. So as such, let's take a quick gander down the lane of history. There is great historical precedence of Black and Jewish relations. There is great historical precedence of Jewish and labor relations. We all know Rabbi Heschel and Dr. King. But more pointedly, the founders of the NAACP invite us to think about Dr. Henry Moskowitz and Joel and Arthur Spingarn, who were in community with Ida B. Wells and Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois. Again, we don't have to go that far. Here in Baltimore, the Black and Jewish form of Bimah, or Blues, worked together with offices at the then Coppin State College, now Coppin State University. In labor, we call on the name of such pioneers as Emma Goldman. We call on the name of David Dubinsky, who helped found the Congress of Industrial Organization, the CIO in the AFL-CIO. Why? In part because the AFL were inhospitable to Black workers, and yet frustrated when Black workers were strikebreakers. When the CIO would go to organize, even in the southern parts of the United States, Black workers stood side by their counterparts because a house united cannot be divided. So we have the historical precedent of beautiful community, producing necessary justice. What then is our ask? Join us, stand with us, reclaim our great shared history. Let us go together and bring the elders. Brother Courtney and I are young, relatively. I also teach at Towson University. And every time I stand before my students, I am made painfully aware of how young I am not. But bring the elders. Let them come with us. Let them guide us. We need their wisdom. And if we move slowly. That is okay. The writer Sylvia Winter tells us that labor's time is not life's time. We move at the spirit of life. But despite us going slowly, friends, family, kin, and believers, we will go far. Join us as we go far. Thank you. Peace to the Lord.